What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today, we're talking our top sophomore running backs for this 2020 fantasy football season. And it only seems natural considering that last time around, we were looking at the top rookie running backs for this year. Now, before we get into it, a quick reminder for all of you guys that are interested, check out the description on the details for how to get your copy of the 2020 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide. It's got everything you could possibly want. Go ahead, pre-order your copy now at a discounted price while it still lasts until June 1st. And inside, you'll be able to see top 150 overall player rankings, standard and PPR formats, individual player breakdowns, projections for every single position, and general fantasy advice as well. So again, all the details are in the description. And as always, if you guys enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe. But for now, let's get right into it. So when it comes to the top sophomore running backs for 2020, let's quickly go through the list of names that we should really be considering. In no particular order, we have got David Montgomery, Alexander Mattison, Miles Sanders, Tony Pollard, Darrell Henderson, Devin Singletary, and Josh Jacobs. Now, these names kind of fall into different categories. You've got some guys that are in the RB1 category, guys that are in the middle RB2, and then also some handcuffs, and then probably a name or two that's going to be falling out of fantasy relevance altogether. But starting with the number one name, maybe to nobody's surprise, that is Josh Jacobs. Jacobs was the highest touted rookie running back last year, so it kind of makes sense that he would be the highest touted sophomore running back in 2020, considering his success as well. Over 1,000 yards for the Raiders. He was really that workhorse guy. Now, he did miss some games, which kind of makes what he did even that much more impressive. I have personally got him as my number one sophomore running back, at least in my standard rankings. When it comes to PPR formats, he doesn't necessarily hold the crown there just because we don't expect the reception total to be as high as it would be for some of these other guys. But when it comes to our standard rankings, again, he is right outside the top 10, flirting with that spot at number 11. I do expect that he will be getting over 1,000 yards again, close to double-digit touchdowns, but the receptions is what's really going to make or break him. I don't have him doing anything crazy in the reception department. I've got him slotted for 30 receptions, and maybe even that's a little bit too high considering some of the running backs that the Raiders have that are good pass catchers and some of the talent they added at the wide receiver position that's going to pick up some of the slack in that area as well. But when it comes down to it, Josh Jacobs is definitely an RB1 for 2020. I think he should be going probably as appropriately in the middle of the second round, early to middle second round, with a higher preference for him in standard and half-point PPR leagues. Now, I did mention that he wasn't actually my number one guy out of these sophomore running backs in PPR formats. That title goes to Miles Sanders of the Eagles. And the reason I'm high on Miles Sanders is because what he did first and foremost as a pass catcher last season, and also because he should be in for a bigger workload this year. That's what the early talk is centered around. Obviously, no more Jordan Howard there, so it's only Boston Scott that's his most imminent competition, and I do think Miles Sanders has an edge over him. Now, as far as rushing projections, I have Sanders going under 1,000 yards, but I fully believe that the reception total should make up for that. I think he will flirt with right around 50 receptions, should have some success in the receiving touchdown department as well. Now, maybe if you look at his stats from last year, you could say that the success he had there could be attributed to the fact that there were so many injuries for the Eagles pass catchers. And look, I definitely can't knock you on that. That's true. So to some extent, put a cap on the ceiling when it comes to Miles Sanders' reception total, but I definitely have it higher than that of Josh Jacobs, which is why Sanders in my PPR rankings currently comes in at number 12, while Josh Jacobs around the 18 to 19 mark for PPR running backs. In standard formats, Miles Sanders is right outside the top 15. Now, I still think he can be a low-end RB1, but definitely an RB1 nonetheless. I would be worried if the Eagles go ahead and add another running back kind of all of a sudden. They're definitely a pass first type of team, which is what gives me a little bit cause for concern if I had to fully commit to Miles Sanders. But I do see his potential to improve there compared to 2019. Doesn't have as much competition. I expect him to be better this year. I expect him to get some more opportunities. So all in all, that signals an RB1 when it comes to Miles Sanders in 2020. Now, let's get to probably my favorite running back to discuss out of the sophomores, and that is David Montgomery of the Chicago Bears. Now, I know that a lot of people probably have Josh Jacobs and then Miles Sanders with their own respective rankings in the RB1 category somewhere, and then big drop off to David Montgomery. It kind of makes sense considering what he was drafted as last year. And in redraft leagues, there's going to be some recency bias. He was disappointing, but hell, the entire Chicago offense was disappointing. However, I am of the belief that he's going to have a much bigger role in 2020 compared to 2019 for a couple of reasons. Now, the Bears, they definitely had a down year last year, but it doesn't change what they want to do offensively. They want to rush the football and they want to play good defense. And it makes sense considering their quarterbacks in Trubisky and Nick Foles. Now, honestly, I don't think whether it's Trubisky or Nick Foles will impact the projections of David Montgomery all that wildly. In standard formats, I have him as my number 19 overall fantasy running back. And then when it comes to PPR formats, just a little bit lower at number 21. But I think out of all the guys that we've mentioned so far, he has the highest potential to really surprise some people. And in drafts, the first two guys in Jacobs and Miles Sanders, they're kind of going in the second round. But David Montgomery, there's a big drop off there in terms of his ADP, which is fourth, fifth round, something like that. But when you think about it, he's an RB1 that is expected to get a lot of usage. Tariq Cohen is not going to be getting wild carries. And Montgomery can also be a decent pass catcher like we saw last year. He doesn't go down easy on first contact. Now, where the worry here for the Bears is the offensive line, really, because that was an area that they struggled in last season. They really didn't do all that much during free agency or the draft to improve that. But I think that they'll still be able to put together a good foot forward for Montgomery, present him enough opportunities where his usage might make up for some of those deficiencies. And I love the upside for David Montgomery. If I had to go ahead and select my favorite sophomore running back for 2020, based on a combination of average draft position, potential, projections, etc., it would be David Montgomery, because in terms of a price tag, it's not all that high. In terms of him beating his projections, I think he can do so more than really the top two RB1s that we mentioned in Josh Jacobs and Miles Sanders. So now let's transition into what I think is the next category where there's really kind of a big drop off. And here coming in at number 4, we have got Devin Singletary. Now, Devin Singletary was a really nice piece for the Bills last season. Obviously, he got nicked up, missed some time, but he still proved that he could be trusted and could be an RB1 type of guy. But the addition of Zach Moss in this year's draft kind of tells you, which is something that we all knew after the departure of Frank Gore, is that the Bills, to some extent, want a running back by committee, someone that can spell Devin Singletary, which I think is a little bit cause for concern when it comes to his fantasy value. He's not a true RB1 that is going to be your primary running back in every single situation. He showed us some flashes as a pass catcher as well when he was lined up in those situations. But again, the addition of a Stephon Diggs will again lower his ceiling in that category. Zach Moss is a very physical type of running back that might also take away some goal line carries for Devin Singletary, which obviously are so very important. At this point in time, I have got Singletary definitely in my low end RB2 category. Now, there's going to be some areas where he could go ahead and blow up in if Zach Moss gets injured or something like that. But let's also not forget that a guy in Josh Allen, the quarterback, is still there for the Bills, and he takes away a lot of rushing opportunities at the quarterback position that the running backs would normally get. You can't really say that for Mitch Trubisky / Nick Foles, or for Carson Wentz, or for Derek Carr. Josh Allen is definitely at the top of that list in terms of rushing quarterbacks that we have to account for, and their tandem running backs. So for that reason, I've got Devin Singletary lower on this list in a fall off in terms of category production as well. I've got him right now right around the 25 mark in both standard and PPR formats. And honestly, that might be a little bit too high. We'll see how the offseason progresses. But as of this point, that's where he stands. And I'll tell you this, even though I still have him as a low end RB2, when it comes to these top 4 guys that we've named, that's it. Because afterwards, really no other sophomore running back has a starting role to the extent that these guys do. So if you're looking for a starting sophomore running back, after you've gone through Montgomery, after you've gone through Sanders, Jacobs, and then Singletary, you're going to be going ahead and waiting a decent amount to select another sophomore running back. And if you do, it'll probably be because you're looking for a handcuff. And using that as a transition, let's look at Alexander Mattison and Tony Pollard, because I pretty much have them ranked at a very similar spot, right around between 45th and 50th overall running back. So you know you're not going to get starting type of RB production from them at all, because the guys ahead of them are respectively Dalvin Cook and Ezekiel Elliott. Now, the reason we still have to mention these guys is because in the absence of Cook or Ezekiel Elliott, well, Mattison and Tony Pollard have proven that they can absolutely carry the load. So the way I would personally treat Pollard or Mattison is I really wouldn't be targeting them or drafting them unless I have Dalvin Cook or Ezekiel Elliott. I always say that if you have a true workhorse RB1 that can have top 5 RB potential, and there's a clear-cut guy behind him that can step in and almost not miss a beat in terms of fantasy production, you absolutely need to target that backup as a handcuff later on. And both Mattison and Pollard fall into that category. Both their respective teams are run-first teams. Definitely the Vikings are. The amount of weapons that the Cowboys are adding as far as pass catchers, look at CeeDee Lamb. You know, maybe they're going to go ahead and focus more on the pass, but still, both these teams want to rush the football. They're more so insurance picks, maybe in blowouts, kind of like we saw last season. You could see one of them star or something like that and get you a touchdown, get you 75 yards, a long touchdown, something like that. But goal lines, first through third down, it's going to be the Dalvin Cook and Ezekiel Elliott show. So again, really just to recap, these guys aren't even in the RB2 category. They are mid-level RB3s, low-end RB3s that you shouldn't be starting. But if one of their running mates in Dalvin Cook or Ezekiel Elliott goes down, they should be owned. I have no problem if you want to go ahead and stash them if they're available at the end of your draft, because again, they provide so much value and they immediately skyrocket to RB1 status, whether it's standard or PPR formats in fantasy. But more than likely, the Dalvin Cook and Ezekiel Elliott owners will overdraft them to some extent, but that makes all the sense in the world. And if you are one of those owners, I advise you to do the same. In this scenario, it's okay to overdraft one of these guys. And now finally, let's look at the last really sophomore running back name on this list. A guy that was generating a lot of interest last year in Darrell Henderson on the Rams because people didn't know what to expect from Todd Gurley, his usage. Henderson was an early round selection by the Rams. He was a good all-around running back, and even more so when Todd Gurley left, people were excited about Darrell Henderson. Well, kind of go ahead and pump the brakes on that, because what did the Rams do this year pretty early on? Well, they went ahead and drafted Cam Akers, and just like that, in 1 year's time, it seems like the Rams have seen enough of Darrell Henderson to say he probably isn't the answer. And that's why in both my standard and PPR rankings, I don't have him cracking the top 50. Now, the problem is the offensive line for the Rams still hasn't really been resolved. So whether it's Henderson or whether it's Cam Akers, one of those guys becomes the number one guy, they could still struggle. That's the issue. Out of all the teams that we've named, the Rams right now have probably the most question marks with their offensive line. And if it's anything similar to last year, that means they're going to have to rely on Jared Goff kind of really throwing the football all over the field in situations where they have to come from behind. So for that reason, even though Darrell Henderson was a name that a lot of people were excited for last year and kind of this year before the draft, at this point in time, he has the biggest, and I mean biggest by far, arrow pointing down when it comes to his stock. I really wouldn't be drafting him in redraft type of situations. We obviously have to see what type of usage the Rams have in mind for Cam Akers, and maybe to some extent Henderson does have an edge up on him because of offseason activities, things like that, and the limitations the rookies will have, or maybe the late start they will have. But I just didn't see anything from Darrell Henderson, and the usage wasn't there last year either. So for that reason, we had to go ahead and mention him just because he is a name that emerged last season. But for 2020, he will be a forgotten name for the most part, and deservedly so. But with that, we kind of wrap this up. So a quick recap. Look, your top two guys, Josh Jacobs, Miles Sanders, you can go ahead and rank them a couple of different ways, whether it's standard or PPR formats, and I don't blame you either way. David Montgomery next, to me, has probably the biggest arrow pointing up in terms of potential, and as someone that I would be targeting in the 4th, 5th round, something like that. And then you get to Devin Singletary. I see a big drop off there, probably somewhere in the 5th, 6th round, and I honestly wouldn't be excited about getting him there either. Then you get to the handcuff category in Tony Pollard and Alexander Mattison. These guys are must own respectively if you have Dalvin Cook or Ezekiel Elliott. So with that, we wrap this up. And as always, let me hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree? How are your own personal rankings playing out, along with any other questions you guys might have? If you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. Also, again, quick reminder, check out the ADP 2020 Fantasy Football Draft Guide. Get yourself a copy now, pre-order it. All the details are in the description. But with that being said, we will see you guys in future videos.